Hey, this is All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things, questions, and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network, a collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. And I'm your host, Christine Lee, checking in for a live look at Bitcoin. The CoinDesk Bitcoin price XBX index currently at $35,369. Bitcoin is, well, it's down about 6.2% over the past 24 hours. The most reliable reference prices for institutions since 2014 are now published under the CoinDesk brand, trusted globally as a leader in crypto news, events, and data.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Bitcoin's most valuable properties as a financial asset is its non-correlation to existing asset classes and macro factors, according to NYDIG. The top crypto asset manager suggesting this chart shows there's no real consistent relationship between real yields and the price of Bitcoin. While Bitcoin has been compared to gold for its posited store of wealth and inflation hedge qualities, gold has historically been inversely correlated to real interest rates. By contrast, NYDIG saying that in their view, Bitcoin continues to be largely driven by factors fundamental to the asset itself, such as, quote, user adoption, network growth, and network usage. Currently, Bitcoin remains locked in a multi-week range of $30,000 to $40,000, even as the United States, the US dollar, gains ground in currency markets on the Federal Reserve's hawkish interest rate outlook. Bitcoin remains fairly resilient, which could be explained by its current oversold environment. And joining me to discuss BTC price and more is our Week in Review panel, CoinDesk Managing Editor of Technology, Christie Harkin in Toronto, and Managing Editor of Markets, Brad Keoun in Austin. Welcome, Brad and Christie, to the show. Always great to have you on. Christie, especially thank you for being a trooper and making it on the show. I know you haven't been feeling well this week, but you're still trying to make a show. Good. All right. So, Brad, the markets, tell me a bit about what you're seeing. We're range bound. Are we going to see a breakout? Of course, we had some factors that could have made some market moves for crypto, like the Fed announcement, but we still seem to be trading sideways.
Trading sideways, in general this week, but, today we're seeing definitely a sell-off here, probably the biggest sell-off in a couple weeks. This comes as traditional markets are selling off. Just listening to you talk about that chart, Bitcoin sort of over a longer term is non-correlated, but increasingly this year, and over the past year, Bitcoin has become more of a macro asset as more big investors get involved. There's more linkages with traditional markets, and so people are seeing Bitcoin as kind of a risky asset, and just like stocks are considered a riskier asset than bonds. And today, as you said, people are moving towards safety or the risk off trade as the Fed potentially is, starting to show signs of moving toward tightening monetary policy. And we're seeing Bitcoin sell off with stocks and other risky assets as the dollar gains in foreign exchange markets.
Mm-hmm. Earlier this week, we heard from Paul Tudor Jones, who said that if he heard soft language coming out of the Fed, any language saying that we're in transitory inflation, that would cause him to make inflation trades, so go all out on it. He nevertheless said he would allocate about 5% of his portfolio to Bitcoin. Also, there was a Bank of America survey out that said, nevertheless, 81% of hedge funds say that Bitcoin is still in a bubble despite the pullback that we've seen. And we also saw data that smaller hedge funds still want to grow their allocation to Bitcoin about 7%. Another story that I would say is capturing the Bitcoin community for sure, it's top of mind, is El Salvador. And as they've passed a bill to create, to make Bitcoin legal tender in the country, they're seeking technical assistance on just exactly how to do that. They have 90 days in which to figure this out until this bill becomes rolled out after being signed. Christie, that seems like a humongous challenge. And they've reached out to the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, CABE, which has approved technical assistance. The World Bank, however, rejected. How are they going to do this?
Wow. Yeah. So the World Bank doesn't want a developing country to figure out ways to become financially independent using a currency that can't be controlled by the World Bank. I'm shocked. Yes. Was this predictable? Of course, predictable. And of course, the World Bank rolled out some old tropes along the way. You know, while the government did approach us for assistance on Bitcoin, this is not something the World Bank can support given the environmental and transparency shortcomings, they said via email. So, yeah, considering that El Salvador has already said they're going to take steps towards being environmentally friendly with any mining that they do. I mean, they want to tap into their volcano, for goodness sake. I don't know how big a concern. I think they're just sort of, you know, blah, blah, environment, blah, blah, transparency, because, of course, cash is you know, super duper transparent. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to stand in their way. I think Bitcoiners are, as they've already demonstrated, I mean, Jack Mallers and Strike and Zap, they've been the ones spearheading a lot of the development on this already. They don't need the World Bank to be jumping in on this. Bitcoiners are pretty good at figuring out how to get stuff done. As for the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, CABE, this is the one that was founded in 1960 by Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and it works as a multilateral development financial institution. What it is going to do is it looks as if they're going to create a technical advisory group to help El Salvador, and that's the kind of help that, you know, could be useful, not just for El Salvador, but in creating mechanisms that will possibly help with Bitcoin adoption in many of these Central American countries, many of which, like El Salvador, have huge remittances that come in from the States, that they're always having to bring foreign dollars in. And this is a really good way of doing it. So I think that they're interested in it, and it's something that, you know, they could be helpful with. But I think that ultimately it's going to, a lot of it come from Bitcoin community pushes to get it done.
And there is a community working on it night and day right now, Bitcoin Beach, the folks at El Zonte. And exactly. It's going to be a huge task ahead of them. They have to deal with the internet issues there, education, getting more people in the country, you know, downloading apps and figuring out how to use this technology at a micropayments level. So it's a big task ahead of themselves. You mentioned, Christie, that we've been working on. Yeah.
All stuff that people have been working. Yeah,
for sure. And you mentioned, Christie, the World Bank cited environmental concerns, and that has been the PR nightmare for the Bitcoin community lately. And Michael Saylor has been trying to address that. He's created the Bitcoin Mining Council. They had a meeting this week, and you know, as MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor's company, raised $500 million to buy more Bitcoin. They have to get their minds around this. But Brad, the conversation focused more on the misinformation out there. What can you tell us about that?
Well, you know, there's a lot of efforts among the Bitcoin mining community and Bitcoin industry in general to sort of counter this narrative that Bitcoin mining is bad for the environment. But there's a lot of smart people who say, you know, it is really bad for the environment. And you can argue whether, you know, the energy usage and maybe the pollution that might come from that justifies, you know, is justified by Bitcoin's value to the economy and the society. But the big picture for Bitcoin market is, you know, this market has been driven by institutional adoption by big investors of getting into Bitcoin. And the ESG investing is such a big deal for these big investors, from BlackRock to pension funds. And, whether you believe, that it's important or not, big investors do. And so some parts of the Bitcoin industry are actually pushing to sort of at least tick the box and say, you know what, we get it. We get that Bitcoin has a carbon footprint, and we're going to do what we can to at least try to offset that. And, whether you believe in that or not, it may, the various solutions, such as there's one fund that is going to buy carbon credits for every Bitcoin that it buys for its fund. There's another project. It's going to create essentially a digital token that packages Bitcoin with a carbon credit, and that would trade as one, clean Bitcoin that a big institutional investor could buy. But the goal here is to just, at least say, all right, yeah, this Bitcoin is maybe carbon neutral, and potentially lure those, at least check the box. So the big institutional investors could then buy Bitcoin.
Right. And another factor that we're also watching is Taproot. That has finally been locked in, and now we're going to have this soft grade update. There it is, all those lovely green boxes. Christie, tell us what happens next.
So we've talked about speedy trial in the past, and this was the consensus parameter that the community agreed on. And according to those parameters, if at least 90% of the blocks mined in any of the designated 2-week difficulty periods signal their support for the upgrade, then the activation process can begin. So to be precise, 1,815 out of 2,016 blocks mined within one of those difficulty periods had to include a little piece of encoded information that indicates that the miners who mine the blocks are in favor of the upgrade. And what you're looking at on that chart, you see a bunch of green blocks. That means that those blocks had that little bit of code signaling readiness for Taproot activation. The red blocks mean that it did not. And the transparent blocks you see at the bottom, well, this chart was screen captured when Taproot locked in. So those blocks still had yet to be mined. But by the time those blocks were filled in, we were over 99%, I believe. So at block 687284, which is roughly when that screenshot happened, a couple minutes before then, the benchmark was met and the difficulty period ended a couple days later, and everything is done insofar as we know it's going to happen. So in November, when we reach another block height, Taproot will actually be activated on Bitcoin. Everybody has, between now and November, all the nodes, all the miners have an opportunity to upgrade to the next Bitcoin protocol, and everything will be hunky-dory, and the developers can start actually, building stuff and doing stuff that enables all the cool stuff that Taproot is going to do for privacy and scalability and multi-sig and all kinds of neat stuff.
Very, very exciting in a very slow and cumbersome way.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Consensus.
Exactly. Also, this week we're seeing a huge drop in the hash rate to a 6.5-month low, and that may be weighing on some sentiment in Bitcoin price amid China's crackdown on Bitcoin miners. Sichuan has become the latest Chinese province to order Bitcoin miners to shut down. Brad, is that having an impact on the markets?
I mean, it's hard to say. There are various theories in the Bitcoin market. People talk about whether price follows hash rate or hash rate follows price. You mentioned NYDIG earlier, and Greg Cipollaro is one of the smartest guys there, and he's one of the smartest guys I've met in crypto, and he says that hash rate follows price. But in this case, we have, basically this China crackdown driving driving miners offline, and that's pushing the hash rate down. And I mean, let's just say it's not good for Bitcoin. I mean, ultimately the hash rate is the security of the Bitcoin blockchain. And, all things being equal, you'd like to see it going up. I think last time we looked, it was 129 exahashes per second, which is still pretty good, compared to where it was last year. But yeah, it's gone down a little bit. So the security's a little off. Maybe, on the margin that could be weighing on market sentiment for sure.
Christie in Texas World. Yeah,
it's still pretty good, compared to where it was.
It's still pretty darn good, though, Brad. It's still pretty good. I mean, it's more, I think, a perception of how China is viewing Bitcoin, that people freaking out that security is down and therefore let's get out of Bitcoin. It's still pretty darn good. It's gone from 129 to 113. It's okay. It's not, obviously better.
On that note, Christie, Texas is facing an energy grid shortfall. What could that mean for miners there? And we got to wrap up. So if you could be brief, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay. So Texas is having a lot of issues with their energy supply. ERCOT, which is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, is asking people, turn off your air conditioners and try to conserve power. And people are going, yes, but what about the Bitcoin miners? Well, the Bitcoin miners are actually turning their energy off too. Don't forget that Bitcoin miners, they look for cheap energy, and a lot of them are either they are dealing with energy that cannot get to the civilian population because it's stranded or it's way far away from civilian centers, or they're turning their machines off because it's not profitable for them because the prices are too high, and it's actually cheaper for them. They make money back by not turning their machines on. So if you're in Texas, don't worry, Bitcoin is not stealing your energy.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much to our week in review panel, as well as a little preview of the next week in terms of mining and hash rate. Appreciate you coming on, and have a great long weekend.
Thanks, Christine. You too. Much needed.
All right. That was our CoinDesk Weekend Review panel with Managing Editor of Technology, Christie Harkin, Managing Editor of Markets, Brad Keoun. That's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christie Lee, and we're off on Monday for the Juneteenth holiday. We'll do it all over again on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Also join me Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. in New York for First Mover, your first look at the day's global crypto news headlines. You're watching CoinDesk TV.